We're glad to have Scott and Tanya along with us this morning as they're going to, or Scott, well, I'm not sure if Tanya's going to share, but to share of what God is doing with Mission E4 and for us to get to know him a little better this morning. So we're thankful that you're here. Welcome. Come on.
Good morning. Yeah, it's a privilege and honor to come get to meet you face to face. I know many in the congregation have worked with Monadnock Christian Ministries for years and were involved with Haiti, and Mission E4 was kind of had a parallel path of our work in Haiti, and when they made the decision to step out of their work in Haiti, we were able to step in and kind of absorb their work with ours. But I'm making my way around to meet all of the folks. I want to say thank you, first of all, to all of those who have just been invested in the country of Haiti for many, many years. Thank you for those that sponsor children. I know as a church body, you sponsor children, and I know there's many here individually that sponsor children as well. I wanted, I guess, it started an interesting point was the passage that was just read, Ephesians chapter 4 was part of the passage I was going to read, so it was great. It was already ahead of time. So Ephesians 4 is actually what Mission E4 is named from, is the book of Ephesians chapter 4. And really, verses 11 through 13 is kind of our core focus of our ministry. My wife Tanya and our 3 children, we lived in Haiti as full-time missionaries for just under 4 years, from 2000 to 2004. And then after coming out of full-time work in Haiti, came back to Massachusetts, where we began to work with young people, youth in Worcester, and then in the town of Hubbardston. So we have 2 locations we work at in Massachusetts with youth. But we also quickly got re-involved in Haiti again, a big part of our heart being there. So in 2005, we started Mission E4 with the idea that God is calling all of us as his children to be missionaries wherever we are. And that passage in Ephesians 4 where it talks about, God gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers, so that the saints, or so that his people would be equipped to do the work of service. And so although there are these leadership gifts that are talked about that are very, very important and necessary to train and to build up, the end goal is that his people would be doing the works of service, that all of us as his followers would no longer be children. Infants tossed to and fro by everything that's going on around us, right? But that we would attain a level of maturity, that we would attain a level of unity. And that has been a real big passion for us in our ministry, both here locally and the work that we do around the world. So right now we work in the country of Kosovo. We work in Albania. We're just wrapping up a 10-year work in India, which right now has just been on pause, but we're most likely going to be recontinuing there as well. We've got work in the inner city, like I said, in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then the suburb of Hubbardston, Massachusetts, which is kind of like Fitchburg, Gardner area out there as well. And we work in Haiti. I'm going to spend more time talking about Haiti. I actually just got back from Haiti last weekend. I was in Haiti for a couple weeks, so it's the first time I've been able to get back down there in 9 months, which is very unusual for me personally as well as for our organization. Typically in Haiti 5 or 6 times a year, so a 9-month absence was a pretty big deal. And going back to Haiti, I wasn't really sure what I was going to find. I wasn't sure how things were going to be with the work that was going on there. Although we've had communication, I couldn't wait to see, face to face with my own eyes how things were going. And when it comes to the work that is happening within the church, when it comes to the work that is happening within the organization of Mission E4 in Haiti, I was very, very encouraged. And I want to get back and share some of those things. So Kosovo, we have 3 churches that we oversee in Kosovo. Most are aware it's a war-ravaged country coming out of the Kosovo crisis where there was attempted genocide. So we have Albanian workers that work full-time in the country of Kosovo with us. In Albania, we work predominantly within the Gypsy community, very outcast people group all throughout the region. We have 2 churches and a school that Mission E4 runs in the country of Albania. Like I said, the youth programs in Worcester and Hubbardston, we have about 500 youth that we work with in our programs in those 2 locations. A lot's changed since COVID for everybody, right? I mean, how we've all had to adapt and adjust and figure out how do we still be there for the people in our communities, although we have to really radically change how services are being handled, right? How we're able to not do things face to face, but yet realize the great need that is still around us. And many of the places that we work around the world, whether it be Haiti, Kosovo, Albania, or in the inner city regions, we're working with many economically depressed communities. And so as this crisis hit, this global pandemic hit, many people were struggling with very basic necessities of food and loneliness and depression and many, many other things that some of us may have experienced as well. Since March 10th, 2020, Mission E4 has been able to distribute over 450,000 meals through the different places that we work. So it's something that the Lord has really helped us to be able to rise up and meet some very tangible physical needs globally through this time. So Haiti, kind of give you the big picture first of where things are at for us in Haiti right now. And then I want to shine a magnifying glass on one community, and I want to actually go back to the very beginning of the work in this community. So kind of big picture right now, Mission E4 has 10 schools in Haiti, elementary school, all the way through graduating high school, through philo. We have 3,300 children in the school programs. We have 4 orphanages in the country. We have a boys' orphanage, a girls' orphanage, and 2 mixed orphanages. We have over 300 Haitian employees that work for us full-time. We have no U.S. missionaries on the ground. It is all Haitian-run, Haitian-led at every level. And one of the things that, even this last trip that I took, which I'm going to kind of get back to that, but we talk about this Ephesians 4 again. It was just really hitting me a lot as I was meditating on this morning, that there are these leadership gifts, right? The apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, teacher, shepherd, teacher. There's the leaders that God gives to guide us and walk us through things. And so many times in the past, when I've talked about what does healthy missions look like, right? It was all about raising up indigenous leaders. And that is part of healthy missions, is raising up indigenous leaders. But as I came back from this trip from Haiti, and I was really meditating on this passage of Scripture today, the end goal is not Christian leadership. The end goal is that all the followers of Christ would be mature, that they would no longer be children, right? And so many years I've kind of focused on, do we have Christian leaders? Do we have Christian pastors? Do we have Christian directors? But what really struck me on this last trip to Haiti was how mature the young people in the community are, not just the leaders, but everyone that has come up through these schools and working in this particular community that I want to share a little story about. And it was all the individuals. It was the people that attend church, not the people that lead the church. It's the people that have attended our schools, not the people that are directing the schools. And really, that was encouraging. It was encouraging to see the maturity that as I looked at this group of people that we've worked with for 20 years now, to see that they are no longer children, tossed to and fro by everything. And even in the midst of this global pandemic, to see the amazing maturity that was in these people to lead and to handle things during this season was extremely encouraging to me. So I want to go back 15 years. I want to talk about one particular village that we began the work of Mission E4 in Haiti, was this village of Cassange. Many of you have been involved in Haiti over the years, so some things you probably know about Haiti, right? So anybody know what the national religion has been in Haiti? Voodoo, right? So it's a pretty dark place historically, right? You go all the way back to the history of the country and its dedication to Satan at the very beginning as it came out of this slave revolt. And I mean, it was a very, very dark place, very separated from the rest of the world, very dark in its spiritual heritage. So in Haiti, there's a city that is the voodoo capital of Haiti, and that city is Léogâne. Léogâne is the center of voodoo for Haiti. And inside of Léogâne, there's a little province, a little community that really was the epicenter of voodoo in the country. So Haiti is actually the voodoo capital of the world. Leogan, Haiti, this city is the voodoo capital of the island, and this little community of Cassange was really the center of voodoo in the entire world. And this is the place that God called us to start a work in one of the darkest spots on the planet. And it wasn't God calling us to do that, but the Haitian leaders that we had been working with and helping to see developed over many years, they were the ones that felt that call. Pastor and Madame Basile in this particular area, licensed Haitian attorney, middle-class Haitian, doing pretty well with his family, a pastor, and he and his family felt called to leave their kind of middle-class neighborhood and move into this darkest of darkest places. At the same time, God was calling us to start this ministry and to partner with them at the very, very beginning. I'll try to paint a picture for what this village looked like as best I can. There was not one church in this community. There was not one Christian person in this community. There was not one married couple in this community, nor was anyone monogamous. It was still a regular occurrence for there to be human sacrifices of children being kidnapped that were abandoned on the streets and used in voodoo rituals for sacrifices. The place was riddled with crime, riddled with every dark thing that you can imagine. Voodoo priests leading people in the worship of demons daily. All you would hear in the background at night was the beating of voodoo drums. And so this is the community moving into this neighborhood, and found an old abandoned property that God really led us to be able to take over. And this place was full of snakes, and it was literal snakes, and a house of immorality. And it was a place where, drug abuse and all kinds of evil practices were happening. This is the place that God called us to have this pastoral family move into. The police said, don't do it. They told Pastor Basile, don't move into this community. It's a bad place. You shouldn't be here. The voodoo priest, the leading voodoo priest in this community, which was really the leading voodoo priest in the country, spoke face to face to our pastor, looked him in the eyes and said, before I allow a church to be planted in this community, I will see you dead. Threats daily for them moving into this community. Started to work with 70 school children, preschoolers and kindergartners. 35 preschoolers, 35 kindergartners. We started a little elementary school. Began to feed the children, educate them, love on them, share the gospel with them. These 70 children, became church on Sunday morning. And it really, by the community, was something that became mocked on a regular Sunday. This isn't church, this is just a children's thing going on. And these 70 children would get together, and they would begin to learn about Jesus, and they would begin to sing Christian songs, and they would begin to feel the love of Christ penetrate their own little hearts as they began to grow in understanding something differently. A girls' orphanage was opened right out of the Basile's home. They began to take girls in that were abandoned, and had they not been rescued, would have been used for many evil things. These girls were taken into their home, and with this group of girls, praying with them every day, leading them to Christ, walking them through understanding that they could have a hope, they could have a future, they could begin to dream things that were different than what they would have ever thought possible. And taking this little group of girls out into the village and going hut to hut and home to home, beginning to evangelize and share the gospel of Christ and pray for people and deliver people from demons. Shortly, some of the moms started to show up to church. They wanted to see what this thing was that their kids were talking about. Little by little, some of the moms began to come to the Lord. Some of the teenagers began to come to this church, some with good intention and some just because they wanted to be rowdy and cause trouble. One of these young guys, Jean Rudy, he was about 16 when he first started coming, and he was such a trouble causer that when I came to visit with a team, I told our lead pastor, I said, you got to get rid of this guy. He's just causing too many problems. And Pastor Basile pleaded with me and said, I know I can win him to Christ, and I know I can disciple him, and I know I can lead him. And I said, okay, it's your call, it's your place, your work. We're here to support you. And sure enough, he led this young man to Christ and began to disciple him, and that young man became the youth pastor of that church. And then continued to grow, got married, and ended up now being the pastor of his own church in another neighboring village, and he and his wife run another orphanage and another school in a neighboring village. So that was kind of that beginning, that very, very dark place. Fast forward 15 years later, in some ways seems like a hard work over 15 years, and yet such a short period of time to see something so radical happen. But today in that community, there are 500 people in church on a Sunday morning. All you hear in the background every night now is worship music and praise music and people singing to Christ. You see, the children in these schools, in this community, have grown up understanding who Jesus is and understanding a different dream and a different hope for a future. We're seeing people get married. The first couple to ever get married in that church was a couple in their 70s. And they wanted to set an example now that they knew Christ. They wanted to set an example to everyone else in town that you could do the right thing. And they stood up in front of this church community, and they were married by Pastor and Madam Bazile as the people in the surrounding community stood outside the walls and hurled insults at them and mocked them for getting married. And they stood up and got married. Now, in the past 15 years, we've married over 70 couples in this community. You now have children growing up in homes with a mom and a dad. You have children growing up knowing how to read and write and understand life differently. You have young girls in this community now growing up with a hope and a dream that I want to get married. I want to have a family. You have young men growing up with a different understanding of respect, a different understanding of dignity, being able to find jobs as they graduate school, where now many of our graduates have become teachers in our school and pastors and elders in our churches and nurses in our clinic. One young girl, Christella, she grew up in our orphanage. Christella and her younger sister, Kathleen, escaped a pretty rough situation, came into our orphanage and was loved on and cared for. And Christella had a real affinity for working with Madame Bazile to learn how to cook. She loved whenever we would have visiting teams down and she could work to cook special things for the groups that would come. And one day I asked her, what is it that you want to do when you finish school? She says, I want to keep cooking. I want this to be something that's part of my life. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what it means. So we helped her over the following 5 years to open up Christella's restaurant. And so Christella now has her own restaurant. And she employs 12 people, 3 of which are from the same orphanage that she came out of. One of the other girls, Francine, is the assistant manager in that restaurant. And talk about an experience of trying to learn how to start a business. It's hard enough to start a restaurant anywhere, right? But in this country, these 12 people working at this restaurant, they've never been to a restaurant before. They had no idea what that even looked like, right? They had to learn how to be clients at a restaurant, learn how to serve clients at a restaurant, learn another language because a lot of our clients speak English. They had to learn how to cook lots of different kinds of food. They had to learn computer systems, customer service skills, learn how to make all kinds of things. But you can go into that restaurant today. When I was there on this last trip, I've seen this develop, but being gone for 9 months and stepping back into this, right, walking into that Christella's restaurant, and I was doing some interviews with some of these girls, and this one girl, Berjna, again, would have been a girl that would have grown up with no hope in this community had it been 15 years ago. And now this 18-year-old girl wearing a Christella's restaurant uniform, sitting there in an interview and say, tell me about what you do here at Christella's. And she says, I'm the barista here at Christella's. Would you like an espresso or an iced mocha? I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? But I mean, it's the real work of development, right? Happens when something is holistic in nature, right? It's not just tackling one part of a problem, but we look at all the impacts on a community that have brought a community down. The spiritual impacts, the economic impacts, the family impacts, the educational impacts. All of these things have to be tackled in order for a community to really change. People have to have jobs when they graduate school in order for there to really be a hope. Right? And here's this young girl telling me about her job and being excited about that. The other thing I loved seeing is the way that our leaders were making decisions. Not just the top leaders, not just the pastor or Madame Bazile, not just the school director or the school principal, but at every level. We've got this young guy, Cassange, who last year was promoted to be the director of facilities. He manages about 17 buildings and properties. And he was one of the kids that came up through the community, one of the kids that was running around in the neighborhood with no hope as a little one, that went to school, got an education, learned a trade. He is an incredible electrician and plumber and understands carpentry and everything to do with building maintenance. And he was promoted last year to be the director of facilities. And the guy that he was raising up was kind of promoted to be the maintenance manager. So I sent him an email about a month ago, and I said, Cassange, we're ready to keep growing the size of our work crews. I said, why don't you go ahead and hire another boss, which is like a supervisor, hire another supervisor and another helper. Instead of just saying, yes, sir, I'll do what you tell me to do, right, which has been the history. Instead, he says, I'll do that if you want me to do that, but this is what I would prefer to do. He says, I've already raised up 2 of our helpers so that they're ready to become bosses. Is it okay if I just hire 2 helpers and promote these 2 guys? Right? And it wasn't just that he had a good decision, is that he truly felt comfortable and confident making that decision and speaking up and having a voice. He's no longer a child. He's somebody that has become mature and has found his own and found his place and found his dignity. Right? And it is amazing to see as I look across this community on this last visit that I'm there, this community has been radically transformed. Radically transformed. I'm watching our office guys that are working in our office there. One of the boys, Ricardo, who also grew up in an orphanage and now has gotten his education, speaks English fluently, speaks Spanish pretty well too, understands computer. He manages all of our child service programs and part of our accounting that goes on in Haiti. Real-time accounting on QuickBooks that syncs with our QuickBooks back here in the States. He's coaching 3 new students that just graduated from high school. He's talking with them about what they want to do next with their life, what they want for their college education. And I'm sitting in on this meeting because I'm just supposed to find out what it is that they want to do so I can talk to the sponsor. And as I'm trying to get all the logistical details down of what college they want to go to or what kind of trade they want to learn, Ricardo lets me finish speaking, and then he looks at all 3 of them, looks them right in the eye and says, don't waste this opportunity. If you get an opportunity to go to school, you study, you work hard. Don't you take this for granted, right? And this young, 23-year-old is like just speaking to them strong and harsh, and not harsh, hard, right, in a way to call them up to who he knows that they can be. Not waiting for a handout, but waiting to take responsibility for their own lives and to make something of themselves like he has and like so many in that community have done. We're building schools, we're building all kinds of things are happening all around. We just installed a brand new enormous generator at our main campus when I was down there. We got a trash incinerator because we're starting a whole trash program to help deal with the trash issues in Haiti. Anyone who's been there knows that trash in Haiti is an issue. Well, finally, we've got some people having some ideas of how to tackle some of these things, right? They are having some of these and working on it, trying to figure this out together. So we're working on all these things, and I've got all these plans, and I'm going down there, and Pastor Bazile says, this will be my last little piece of this story, but Pastor Bazile says, Pastor Scott, we have a surprise for you. And I'm like, okay. I hadn't been there in 9 months, right? But 9 months is really not that long of a period of time. And I'm thinking about all the things that we've been involved in here in the United States and our own communities, right? Struggling through this coronavirus pandemic and everything that's going on, and how are we adjusting and how are we adapting and what's the new normal and all these other things, right? They're dealing with all those things and 100 times more with an economy that's collapsed, with being a 5th world country. I mean, this little pocket of this transformed community is not representative of Haiti. I'm talking about one community that God has done an amazing thing in, and we've seen this begin to happen in other places. So Pastor Bazile says, Scott, I have something we've been working on that I want to show you. He says, we've begun to work on building a new church building. Because now with our attendance being 500 to 600 every Sunday, the place that we've been meeting isn't adequate. And in my mind, I've got pictures of what I think this is going to be, and what's the ask going to be? What is he looking for me? I mean, these are just where my mind goes after working in Haiti for 20 years, right? Trying to understand this. And I round the corner of him showing me this new church building. I mean, this church building is I want to say, I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not meaning this as anything here. I'm just trying to give you a perspective. This new church building is about 10 times the size of this building we're sitting in right now. 10 times. Enormous. Huge raised cathedral front where the stage is being built, and and classrooms and meeting rooms and all these other things at this church building. Not $1 was raised through Mission E4 to build this church building. The members of the church did this. The Haitian church did this. They raised the money to build this building. They raised the money to buy that $50,000 piece of land that it's on. Shocking. I was blown away, more than I have been blown away in 20 years of working in Haiti, right? Not just because of the building, right? It's the community. This community has been changed. Yes, they need our partnership. They need us to still be there as collaborators with them, right? But they don't need us to do it for them. They have grown up in this community, and it is amazing, amazing to see at every level, every place, every community, moms and dads being confident as moms and dads, children growing up with a hope and a future and really believing that something can happen. None of that could have happened without people sponsoring children. None of that could have happened without us being involved in the beginning or being a part of things. But at the same time, we have to, as leaders, right? Apostles, pastors, prophets, evangelists, teachers, and all the other leaders that are here, I have to remember, right? It's not ever my role to just continue to have to steer every part of the ship, right? But my goal is to see them no longer be children, tossed to and fro by everything that comes up. We saw the same thing in Worcester with the youth that we work with, 15 years working with these young people, and everyone that leads our youth program comes from the community that we work in, every one of them. And they're leading the charge. And when this pandemic hit and we didn't know what was going to happen, we said to them, what do we do? Do we just close down? Do we just close doors, or what do we do? And immediately they began to cry out, there's people in our neighborhoods that are hungry. There's kids that were relying on getting food at school. There's kids that were relying on getting food at our after-school programs. There's kids that were relying on food and relationships at church. And in one day they lost school, they lost their after-school programs, they lost their church community. We have to do something about this. These kids, I'm talking like 15, 16-year-old kids crying out, we have to do something. We have to respond. We have to rise up. We have to be the ones who are meeting the needs of the people in our communities. So we put it back to them. So what does that look like? So, well, let's start getting food and let's bring it to them at their homes. House to house to house to house, delivering this food to them. Every day, they started delivering food to these homes of these young people. Put together an entire online youth program with them being the actors and the screenplay writers and the broadcasters so that these kids wouldn't be at home without having a connection to the things that had been so meaningful to them. So my encouragement for all of us, right, is our role as individual believers, our role as individual Christians, as we sit under teaching, is to take that teaching, take all those gifts of leadership that God has given us, and take it to heart and ask God, what does it mean? What does it look like for me to grow up? What does it look like for me to do the work that you have called me to do? And is there more work that you've called me to do? How do I be a thriving, essential Christian in my community? And how do we look at all those others out in our community? How do we look at those families that might be struggling, suffering, hurting? Instead of just looking at them as people in need, how do we see through that need and have a vision that God has something He wants to do with them, not just for them? How do we see in every person we come in contact with that God has a plan for their life? We say it, but we got to see it. We've got to look into the eyes of these children and youth and families, and we've got to see the way God sees them, the potential that is in each and every person in our community around us. Not only calling people to Christ, but calling people up to everything that God is intending for them to be. Ways you can continue to get involved with us: certainly sponsor children. We have lots of children that still need sponsoring. There's lots of other communities all around Haiti that have not had that radical transformation yet. Like I said, we have 3,300 children in school. We have 2,200 of them sponsored, so we still have over 1,000 children in need of sponsors. You can join us on a trip. I know there's a lot of people that have taken trips here from the congregation over the years. We lead trips to Haiti 4 times a year. I'd love for you to join us on a trip, but really our heart is right here. Even when you go on a trip to Haiti and you come back, how is that experience impacting what are we doing right here in our own neighborhood, in our own community? How are we all together being united and growing up into the fullness of Christ, with each part doing its part, with each person fulfilling the call that God has given us? How are we each being a missionary wherever we are, in our own communities or wherever God may call us around the world? Let me pray. Father, thank you for your love for us and your faithfulness. Thank you for your mercy that you've shown us. Lord Jesus, I'm so thankful that you left that place of beauty in heaven where you didn't lack anything, Lord, and you left that place and you came to this hurting, broken, desperate world, and you became human. Lord, you willingly laid aside all the privileges that you had, Lord, to become frail and fragile like us, Lord, and even allowed yourself to be tempted in every way as we were, yet without sin, Lord. We're thankful that you became that rescuer for us, Lord. And following that example, God, I pray that you truly, Lord, would help us to understand what it means to be your hands to this world, your feet, your mouth, your arms. Lord, you have called us to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. Lord, I pray that you would help each and every one of us to bring hope where there's despair, to bring healing where there's sickness, to mend brokenness, to bring peace where there's war, to bring love where there's hatred, to bring light where there's darkness. Lord, help us to guard our words carefully and make sure the things that we speak, the things that we say, build others up, believe the best in those that we come in contact with, and lead people, Lord, into a relationship with you. Help us to understand you better, Lord. Help us to understand your word and your call. And Lord, we're thankful for the leaders that you've put in our lives, Lord, those that teach us and train us and equip us. I pray, Lord, that none of us would take that for granted, and we would rise up and do the things that you have called us to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you. Thank you all.